Hi there, this is Sarah Pearson, and we want to thank Maureen Madison and Jan Dunbar Cooper at SAMHSA for giving us this opportunity to work with tribes and to speak with you today. For 7 years, my colleague Cipriano Lucario and I have teamed up to work with and listen to tribes addressing the impact of alcohol and drugs and seeking culturally relevant ways to make positive change. All right, Mark, I think we're ready for the Prezi. I need to share my screen. Hold on a second. All right, can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Thank you.
Yes, perfect.
So we know that the way to a tap is not through a workshop or a list of formulas or even maybe a template or two. It's really a journey to be traveled through the seasons of time and experienced with as many tribal members as possible. This series that you're joining in now is an overview of the tap journey meant to spark your interest, give encouragement and guidelines, and challenge you to dream of the good life for the people. If you joined us before last month, you went through with us the first module on knowledge gathering, getting all the knowledge that you need to learn about the key elements and the nuts and bolts of a tribal action plan. Today, we're going to talk about planning and preparing. And I thought the best way to do that would be to have one example from the Oneida Nation give us a little bit of an overview and a review of what a tap is. So first, we're going to share 2 quick PSAs from the Oneida Nation on their Tribal Action Plan journey.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ledgy Hill. I'm the Community Resource Officer at the Oneida Police Department. I'm here to answer the question, what is a Tribal Action Plan? In order to understand what a Tribal Action Plan is, you will need a quick background. In 2010, Obama signed the Tribal Law and Order Act, which mandated several federal agencies to work with tribes in combating alcohol and drug abuse on their reservations. The Tribal Law and Order Act was signed because alcoholism and drug abuse were highest amongst Native Americans than any other race. The federal agencies worked with tribes out west to figure out what works and doesn't work. They kept the things that worked and created the Tribal Action Plan Guideline. They found that when you incorporate a holistic healing approach of mind, body, and spirit, the success rate increases dramatically. One thing our community needs to understand is this is a guideline, a step-by-step process which many tribes are implementing to address alcohol and drug abuse. The Tribal Action Plan Guideline is universal and can be used to address any issue tribal communities are facing. We are using it to address alcohol and drug abuse in Oneida. So what is in a Tribal Action Plan? The plan's primary focus is to make sure is in alignment with our culture and traditions, which will strengthen our identity. It's a fluid document that changes with the community's needs. It is not a program. It is a strategic plan that is inclusive to our addicts, their families, the community, our service providers, and programs. It's a strategic plan that reorganizes and aligns our resources to the community's needs. It's a plan that breaks down the barriers for getting immediate help. It's a plan that incorporates prevention, intervention, and education. Lastly, I would like to explain the steps within the Tribal Action Plan Guideline. Step 1 was to create a resolution to address the alcohol and drug abuse in Oneida as a primary issue. Within the resolution, it also states to form a Tribal Coordinated Committee. The Tribal Coordinated Committee is charged with creating, implementing, and revising the Tribal Action Plan based off the community's needs. Step 2 was to have the Tribal Coordinated Committee do an inventory assessment of the nation's strengths, needs, resources, opportunities, potential partners, and needed funding streams. This step is taken to look at what resources are already available and how we can realign them to be more efficiently and effective. Step 3 was to do a community readiness assessment. The assessment gauges how aware Oneida is of the epidemic, what resources are available, how involved is the leadership, how the community feels about the epidemic. This step is taken to identify where to start. The starting point was identified to raise awareness. Step 4 was to create the tribal action plan's vision, mission, and value statement. Step 5 was to create the goals and objectives to combat the alcohol and drug abuse. Finally, step 6 is to execute our to-do list so that we can reach our goals. We know families are drowning in this epidemic, trying to keep their heads above water. We are working diligently to execute our goals and objectives of the Tribal Action Plan. We have completed all steps and have created the first draft of the United Nations Tribal Action Plan. I recommend and urge our community to take it upon themselves to self-educate by clicking on the link to get their own copy of the United Nations Tribal Action Plan. I am only giving you a brief summary of what a tribal action plan is. We are doing this video in hopes to raise awareness. The next video will be about what officers are seeing on the front lines regarding drugs and alcohol and how they are affecting the users and their families. We can only move as fast as our slowest person. We need to move forward together as a community, and it starts with you. Y'all won't go for your attention.
Thank you, Officer Hill from Oneida Nation. That was a fantastic PSA. I would love to share this other one with you too. Just a short one.
As the elected government of the Oneida Nation, we recognize a sense of urgency to address the growing epidemic of substance abuse issues on the Oneida Reservation.
This crisis stems from generations of trauma that can no longer be ignored. Our family members are dying spiritually and physically from substance abuse every day.
The Business Committee has a tribal action plan. The plan will focus on the development of a comprehensive prevention and intervention strategy to address substance abuse.
Nationally, 80% of opioid addicts start with the use of prescription drugs. Unfortunately, we are overwhelmed with staggering statistics rising in our community. Recently, we had 2 nearly fatal overdoses happen within a 12-hour period, and 1 individual needed to be resuscitated with 4 doses of Narcan, the anti-drug.
The Oneida Nation Police Department has more than 127 arrests so far this year. Our drug crime rate is 30% higher than the highest rate in the past 9 years.
Victims of lethal drug overdoses are not just typical druggies getting high. They are mothers, fathers, aunts and uncles, and maybe even grandparents.
We have to rise as a community to address this problem. Educate yourself and your loved ones, and keep your family involved in education, sports, and family activities.
Together, we can help heal our community. This governing body is committed to strengthening and protecting our people by exercising our sovereignty.
Together, we will strengthen Oneida with a good mind, a good heart, and a strong fire.
I hope that gives you a really good background of one group's efforts towards developing their tribal action plan. And they worked really hard on it. And I wanted to show you, before we jump into the rest of our presentation today, just a quick nickel tour through the Oneida Nation's first version of their tribal action plan. It is currently being updated as we speak because they're doing it the right way. They're renewing it every 24 months or 2 years. But let's take a quick tour through what they did. It's about 24 pages long. And I like how they have the wonderful cultural pieces on the front cover, the belt and other pieces that they've incorporated into their tab as a way to show that they're weaving culture through the entire tribal action plan. So you'll see here their table of contents is pretty straightforward. They give a background of the TAP work, a brief history of Oneida Nation. They took an inventory of the environment around them. They did their community readiness assessment. They got technical assistance from our group at SAMHSA. They worked on their goals, objectives, activities, and outcomes. They talked about evaluation. They talked about their tribal coordinating committee and a little bit of contact information. I like this here. They've listed out their tribal coordinating committee and where they are in the community, the business grants, cultural heritage, high school principal was involved, an elder services manager was involved, social worker, domestic violence was involved, government services division, Wise Women Gathering Place, Director of Behavioral Health. They had a nice, diverse, even lay people involved. Very, very important. They share their vision and mission statement over here. Very helpful to kind of giving us a sense of what's driving their tribal action plan. That's their vision statement. Over here, these 2 pages, they incorporate a little bit of their culture, their language, and a snapshot of a cultural story that's important to the nation. I like the branding too at the bottom, the Oneida with their logo. That's wonderful. They give a historical perspective of who they are and a brief national chronology so they know where they've come from. That's so important when you're developing a plan for where you're going to go. They've provided a chronology of where they've come from. And there's a picture of the business committee that worked on the TAP. A little bit about the inventory they took of the assets in the environment. They talk a little bit about the community readiness assessment process that they went through, what it's all about. They shared their scores. They have a universal score of denial resistance. So based on that, they were able to calibrate the goals to meet that level of readiness in the community. And here are some images of the technical assistance that was provided to help them get off the ground with their TAP. A little bit about their goals and objectives. They only had 4 goals, but they stretched those across a number of years. So they wanted to raise awareness of the drug and alcohol epidemic. They increased coordination and collaboration across systems relevant to alcohol and drugs. They increased accessibility to bring awareness to the services and systems for all community members. And they are planning to open a wellness campus, which is a really big deal. Over here, it's a little hard to read, but this is how they broke down their goals, objectives, outcomes, who's going to lead the work, when they expect that work to be done, year 1, year 2, and what outcomes they expect to happen as a result. So this 1 page for each goal. A little hard to read, but you can get a copy of this. I'm rounding it out with a little bit about evaluation and monitoring, a statement signed by all of their tribal coordinating committee members, and ending out with some contact information and a resource list. And that's all you need to do a TAP. You don't need a 100-page document that no one will read. You need something simple that can be passed out to the community that everyone can understand. And so let's jump into today's module 2, and I'll turn this over to my colleague, Cipriano Lucario. Cipriano?
Thank you, Sarah, for that opening. And I really appreciate Oneida's hard work. And welcome everybody to today's discussion. As always, please stop us at any time in regards to raising your hand, asking a question in the chat box. Because as you can see on this slide, we're doing our very best to just be resource rich and to talk about the different opportunities your tribal nations and tribal services have in engaging the community, supporting leadership, and identifying prevention priorities through this effort. And I have to admit, I'm a little jealous of Leggy. Anybody who knows me knows I talk really fast, and there was so much information in Leggy's first PSA. That was just full of information. But you know, one of the sentences I wrote down in hearing that was, you know, the alignment of culture, traditions, and services. You know, and in our work with Oneida, they talked a lot about they're ready to create action. That, you know, crime rate was going up, the overdoses were happening, the impact of substance abuse. And there was a high level of readiness. And as you saw their TCC members, they did a great job in thinking, who's at the table, who's ready to do this work, and let's assess who's not at the table, because that's also getting ready to do some work as well. Yet their PSAs invited leadership, they discussed data, they were encouraging, and they were motivational. So that social marketing and the PSAs, I thought, is just a fantastic piece to help guide these 2 tracks. And I'm sure everybody on the call knows how important our engaged leadership is, our elected officials, our health directors, our program coordinators, and our community track, our relatives that are respected in the community, that are champions in moving the community and assisting us to digest what we're learning and the opportunity out of that. And both of these parts of our community, both of these tracks within our communities are vital to mobilizing our prevention services and wellness. And the Tribal Action Plan is a tool that Oneida uses in order to synthesize where the rubber meets the road between these two efforts. And so in today's discussion, and for anybody who this is new, this is a second module of 4. The first one has been recorded, and that's really kind of getting ready to get ready. And this module, we're really focusing on the planning and preparation stage for strategic planning initiatives. In this viewpoint, and again, nothing is set in stone here. These are just bullet points and observations our TA Center has made in supporting SAMHSA's work in the leadership track in planning and preparing, understanding the role of leadership in TAP development, not having leadership develop the TAP, but provide the guidance, the direction, the resources to allow our community and our respected program coordinators and health directors to dream about the best opportunity their programs, their services, their departments, or their work can contribute to. A leadership helps assemble the tribal coordinating committee. It identifies and opens the door for training and technical assistance. And it strengthens the opportunity for local data through the TCC by acknowledging the importance of engaging the community, mobilizing the community, and can assist in determining. So you could see here the leadership play a vital role, but not the only role in the community. The community track here in planning and preparing, we're going to be talking about engaging that community level to support bringing the federal background information to those respected members and helping them start to translate the opportunity under the TAP and think about what that means from their lens, through their language and through their local processes to participate in the development of activities, goals, and objectives, and really build that collaborative mindset. So what can we do to really push forward that collaborative mindset? Sarah, did I miss anything on the slide?
No. Well, we do encourage just people at large to join in the tribal coordinating committee, get involved or support one of the subcommittees and support the TAP efforts through election cycles. Because as we're well aware of, a leader that may be supporting the TAP this year may not be around for two years from now. So it's up to the general community to keep beating that drum of support for the TAP effort.
Yeah. So, when we think about leadership, in the red is kind of just the action steps that can be taken. And as you could see, everything about this is kind of an ongoing process. I think it's important for us, historically, we looked at strategic plans as there's a vision, it's created, and we know that there's really good plans that have been created that unfortunately have sit on our desk or shelves and collected dust once they were completed as an objective or a deliverable. Yet we know the most important piece is the recipe of creating the strategic plan. Ongoing strategic planning process is going to be vital. What we're seeing from the different federal agencies under the Tribal Law and Order Act is more funding streams are being created, new funding streams are being created, and they're still asking for action plans or strategic planning efforts. So every new funding stream, a tribe is going to have to consider, am I going to try to present something new, or do I kind of go back to the recipe that I know is engaging communities? And so as you can see here, there are some basic documents that have been supportive of leadership's understanding, the TAP guidelines, thinking about a resolution. What would a tribal resolution look like to mobilize the community in strengthening prevention efforts? Establishing the tribal coordinating committee, and leadership's role is to think about the barriers that impact efficiency, and effectiveness. And if those and strengthen communication, I think if we just looked at those three areas in the initial planning processes, communication and collaboration, and how successful we are in collaboration would be a great start to any local effort and setting expectations or supporting collaboration across the TAP community. What we're seeing is leadership's role can really strengthen attendance in meetings. And I love the development of PSAs. How are we mobilizing our community, telling our stories, and really celebrating those successes? And those all are within a social marketing campaign or social marketing plan that could be creative. So not just always talking about the challenges, but identifying and acknowledging the successes can be vital markers for prevention and early intervention efforts. And then most importantly is, again, once we're done for 2 years, let's go back and really strategize and think about it again. And for everybody who knows us, we talk about 2 curriculums in this process for updating that are low tech, low cost. And what we're seeing is tribes looking at these curriculums and saying, how do we start to train our community members and staff to help facilitate these conversations so we can have them ongoing? And that is the community readiness assessment, as well as a GONA, or Gathering of Native Americans curriculum. And here on this slide, again, those traditional knowledge keepers, those champions, how do we not only engage them, but keep them engaged? That is the biggest maintaining momentum support. We know that we have a lot of community advisory boards that come into our community, but how do we really empower those boards for that leadership hope? To empower that board to create the vision and not micromanage our departments, but create flexible goals that every department will have a role in contributing, so we could understand collective success. That's where a vital facilitator, somebody who is not embedded within the services, but has that respect, has that knowledge, and has that wellness within them in order to help facilitate the conversation and guide the conversation and support the collective thought in ways that we're creating solutions. So that role is not just engaging, but maintaining that momentum, supporting, sharing public appreciations, and providing a seat at the table for them to share the work and success that they're having.
Thank you, Cipriano. I almost had a happy trigger finger to move forward. So the next part of this presentation really takes us through this entire slide. There's a lot going on in this slide, but the most important part of renewing a culture of collaboration and connection among your systems within the tribe in support of a tribal action plan is looking at the tribal members. And one of the things that we think about is if the community is at a high level of readiness when we meet them to do a tribal action plan training, we'll join them in jumping into a tribal action plan training. But sometimes, and actually more often than not, a tribe is going through some repercussions of historical traumas that have happened in the past. And it doesn't make sense to just jump right into a tribal action plan training because they're really not ready to move in that direction. So we open up with a gathering of Native Americans, GONA, to help us unpack some of the trauma that has happened before. And we kind of unpack some local data that we really need to get from various members around the community, 360 degrees of people in the community, people who are in recovery, elders, youth, people returning from incarceration, trying to strengthen the community so that all are involved in this very important document called the Tribal Action Plan for the, building a nation for the 7 generations ahead. Cipriano, did you want to say something about how a GONA can help strengthen the Tribal Action Plan?
Sure, definitely. One thing I learned through strategic planning is that, engaging tribes to develop a strategic plan, we're going to be peeling back some layers. And when we think about what our tribal nations or tribal citizens or our tribal families or our relatives or our ancestors were up against, we're starting to peel back multiple layers. And there's not a curriculum out there that integrates healing and prevention planning better than the GONA. And when I say that, I think it's important because we know what we're learning from tribes is alcohol is a symptom of many other challenges. And we have to unpack those other challenges in order to see what we could do to address the symptoms. And so what I realize when we do strategic plans with tribes and we start to talk about what happened to us as a nation, we're going back to our ancestors and those historical challenges that impacted the growth of our tribal nations. And a perfect example of this, unfortunately, is playing out today in social media due to the residential boarding schools, which when we engage tribes, we know is a reality for us as Indian people. And yet this is just being discovered in mainstream society. And so when we think about healing from historical trauma, these are the topics that we're addressing in this prevention planning process. So that GONA really allows us to think about not only the historical traumas, but what happened, what was created out of what unhealthy generational patterns came out of that, and how those unhealthy generational patterns created the current realities that our people are impacted by. And then we see the symptoms of alcohol abuse or misuse, substance use or misuse. We see tribal opioid response challenges, methamphetamines or suicide. You know, these are very systemic challenges in nature. And so I think it's important for us to be realistic that if we're going to do a strategic plan and we're really going to talk about healing, to be prepared that we're going to be unpacking multiple generational stories. And in order to do that in a good way, in a kind way, in a safe way, in a respectful way, we need culture. We need that tribe's culture, not just a culture. We need a tribal specific culture and a process to help us let go. Because our hope is to mobilize the community. And what we're learning is in the sense of resiliency and strength-based efforts. And that's definitely not going to come from a federal program. That has to come from within the tribal people. So if we get to that, how do we have these solution-focused conversations? The GONA really plays a role in that and walks the community through guided activities to structure conversation, to have solutions around healing and wellness. And that's why it plays such a vital role in it. And as you could see here, these different entities on the outside circle all have their language and culture within their frame of thought, even though prevention's all in every one of them. So a lot of translation, a lot of belonging, a lot of relationship building between these entities in order to even have this collective conversation. So no small feat, yet that curriculum to me is probably the best that we could use. And it really lays some foundations for the recipe for a tribe to consider using the GONA as a recipe for prevention planning, not as an event, but as a recipe to engage the community, start to find solutions, and start to mobilize the community around wellness efforts. Hope that captured it, Sarah. That was kind of a long way around it.
Oh, no, I think that was wonderful. And thank you for that, Cipriano. The next, what you guys are about to see is going to go like warp speed, fast and furious. So please take advantage of the chat box. We'll try to keep our eyes on the chat box. By the way, tell us who you are and where you're calling in from. That would be lovely to know. And if you have any questions, just drop them in the chat box. And if you feel like we're going a little too fast, no worries. This is being recorded and that recording will be sent out later. So we enter this circle of planning with the Tribal Action Plan by, as we just described, gathering our people together and maybe going through the GONA process as a way to open the door to planning. But the first thing on the menu is to have the group get together and describe a vision of where they see themselves going in the future. The vision embodies the spirit of why the tribe wants to change, why they want to change. And the vision is really, it answers the question why, and it's the cohesive goo or the magic sauce that keeps the tap together, kind of holds it all together. When people say, what's this tap for? The answer is the vision statement. So you have to be very clear, write a very clear, not long, but short, clear vision statement that gets to the spirit of why you want to change what's happening in your community to address alcohol and substance misuse. And from that vision, we start also moving into collecting information and data that's local. One of the things that Cipriano mentioned was the Community Readiness Assessment, the CRM. And there is a link to that. I'm not going to click on it now, but if you go back to this recording or this Prezi, you can click on this link right here and it'll bring up another Prezi that walks you through the entire CRM process. So you gather that information of capacity and readiness to take action, talk about the structures that are happening in the community already, the cultural, political, social, and spiritual structures, and do a little bit of a needs assessment. You may already have this information that you've already gathered from other grants that you've gone after, or you may need to take an updated approach to gathering information on the needs in the community. Cipriano, can you help me out with this one?
Yes. You know, this is a general, basically a SWOT analysis. And it's really kind of just looking at specifically the inventory, the needs component of it. And so, you know, really kind of thinking about the strengths and protective factors, the opportunities, the barriers, and needed funding streams. Now, thinking about how this would be done in a GONA model, you know, or how this would be done in organizational development, there's a million different ways that we could go around collecting this information. Whether we do, you know, like a World Cafe and people just rotate around the room and take markers and write things up. We engage in stuff. You know, we do some activities in the GONA curriculum. But the reality is that in order to get people comfortable to start to share, there's a lot of pre-work that gets done before we do this in a good way. And the GONA curriculum really talks about it belonging, but it's really trust building, creating that framework so we could have these tough conversations so people can say, hey, this is a barrier. This is where funding would be most helpful. This is the opportunities that we see. And so, you know, this is just a great example of how to use a SWOT analysis in a way that you're collecting focused information, and this information will be weaved into a tribal action plan, maybe highlighted in a tribal action plan as a method or methodology. Yet some of these bullet points would definitely need to be fleshed out in goals and activities.
So that was, this one takes a look at structures.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have another one that looks at questions to guide potential partner SWOT analysis. So these are, we're not going to go into depth on these, but this is just sort of giving you a taste of what kind of inventory we would suggest that you start gathering with your team. And we can go a little deeper with some wonderful questions that get the team thinking based on NICWA's relational worldview model, looking at the environment, the infrastructure that you're dealing with in the tribe, the current resources that you have at hand or what you don't have, and a little bit more about the mission and vision that you're working on. So let's take a look at these questions. Cipriano?
Yeah, I'm so thankful for Terry Cross, who has been just a guiding leader in Indian country for a long period of time, and his work at developing this kind of relational worldview. And, you know, there is hundreds of ways we could strategize, whether it's organizational development or developing a strategic plan, but doing it in a culturally appropriate way, meeting families and Native communities on where they're at, integrating healing. We are really leading this effort, I feel, as Indian country, and we're seeing this. We know we do things different, and just look at how Indian country responded to the COVID challenges. You know, our tribal nations went above and beyond some state recommendations. Our tribal nations shared resources with non-native groups within their tribal lands or tribal areas, opened up their healthcare services maybe to non-native allies or non-native people living in the community, sending out PPE. So our COVID response, protecting our tribal elders, whether we use native artists, we use telehealth, we had to adjust to the current realities. And I think that this cultural worldview is actually giving us ideas around that. And so just kind of looking at these bullet points and asking these questions, how do we ask these questions in a way that we're engaging our system, engaging our community to help them help us how to flesh these efforts out more, make sure the activities are matched to their frequency, or, finding ways that they can contribute to making these things happen.
I particularly like that fourth bullet. What is the sphere of influence of the people on your team? I mean, that's a great question because you could be sitting in a team and not really realizing who's on the team and what, who they reach. So just that question alone gets you to you could draw that in sort of a mind map. You could start asking yourself questions like, well, it doesn't look like our team is reaching very many people. Maybe we need more people on the team. So each one of these questions really does take you down the Alice's rabbit hole, and you can really get some very important information that you need to gather before you start developing a tribal action plan itself. Here are some more questions that go to help you go a little bit deeper about social services and law enforcement policies and procedures that might need to be updated, training that might be needed. And what about a trusted relationship that could be built with a key agencies or department heads that you really should be working together with? And beyond that, the question asks you to think even deeper. What is your definition of a trusted partner? So these are very helpful questions just to get ready before we start planning. On your mission and vision, here's some interesting questions. Thinking about the tribe's allies who will form new alliances to support the TAP initiative. How are families involved so they feel that they're being supported and partnered with on the TAP? So it starts to get you to think of beyond just the obvious. And resources. I like this set of questions, especially the one at the end. How would the TAP champion or elevate your culture? Very important. How could federal funding, like funding from SAMHSA, Indian Health Service, BIA, Department of Justice, HUD, Department of Labor, or FEMA, support a TAP-driven prevention system? So these are very, very deep questions that you really should have a conversation about before you start planning, because they're going to start to help you to identify and prioritize goals that you may want to work on.
And I would recommend, I know that thinking about our 2 tracks, that model definitely would fit like our organizational, you could see it in the language, our tribal social services. What would these questions be translated to for our community gatherings? And how can we restructure some of these questions in order to be engaging our community around trying to harvest as much information around these efforts as well. So again, that's where the translation of our departments and our staff that could say, okay, this is going to be for our organization, this is going to be for our department strategic planning, this is going to be to mobilize our prevention services and youth services. But how do these questions, or can we translate some of these questions to our community so they could help us understand what a healthy collaboration between departments would look like and how those departments could collaborate to better serve them?
Thank you. So once you've gone through all of that collection of data, which is you schedule plenty of time for that. And the best time to do that is into a winter season when you've got time where people aren't out there doing a lot, but you pull them together and have these conversations about collecting inventory and finding out where your readiness is. When you've got all that information and you've got your vision statement, now you're ready to start moving into a section of the planning we call brainstorming. So you've got all of this information to work with. What do you do with it? Well, from the vision statement that you have, You start entering the circle on the east side, and you use that vision statement, as we talked about earlier, to guide your decisions on what goals, the big long-term goals towards that vision are, what the smaller short-term bite-sized goals would be, which would be called objectives. What activities need to happen. Activities are the action in your action plan, the phone calls, the meetings, the one-on-one outreach. Tying real people, their names, their committees, their friends, their aunts, their uncles, to each one of these goals and objectives and activities. When do you expect this work to be done? Launching into implementation, monitoring your efforts and watching for outcomes and making adjustments as needed. And then the cycle starts all over again. And in all of this work, we try to remind everyone to remember to make your goals and objectives specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. There are entire webinars that just talk about SMART goals and objectives that we won't go into today. But also other strategies are to make sure that your goals and objectives are strength-based, trauma-informed, and of course, culture-based. So as a quick review, this slide kind of shows you a little bit that you're going to have a lot of activities supporting objectives, fewer goals, all going towards one vision. And here's an example vision from Oneida Nation. The Oneida Nation is committed to a holistic approach to inspire hope, belonging, meaning, and purpose for all. So let's take a look at what one group has done, a consortium in the Northwest. It's a consortium of tribes that are across Washington State, Oregon, and Idaho. And it's a really neat group, Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board. And they've come up with primary goals for a 4-year term. And Cipriano, what did you think about this list? I thought that they did a really good job. This is something that I think 30 to 44 tribes are working together to increase capacity, increase knowledge and awareness, improve tribal policies and procedures, improve intertribal and interagency communication, and increase knowledge and understanding. What did you think about this list of goals? And this is for 4 years.
Yes. I think for anybody on the call, this is a great example for a strategic plan or a tribal action plan for reservations that span big geographical areas. I know that, some of our reservations, the west side doesn't always know what's going on the east side. We're broken across counties, maybe states. And it really leaves that onus of collaboration and knowledge to the tribes about working within these different systems, the different silos, or these different state processes. This example is for 44 tribes that are across 3 states. And I love that they kept the goals for the region in ways that they're not micromanaging the departments, but they're creating a seat at the table for those departments to share with the regional vision of these collected efforts. Now, that's no small feat, yet that's the opportunity that, they were looking at. How can they weave in Northwest Tribal Consortium's efforts, their resources, their collective vision with the local knowledge, the local tools, and the local policies and procedures to promote wellness and prevention with the tribes in their region. I think this is a great way to keep it simple. This is a great lesson in the flexibility of the English language and finding and wordsmithing goals that we're finding ways that our departments and programs can contribute to. And it puts the onus on assessing the capacity, the knowledge, awareness, policies and procedures, communication, and services instead of creating them or trying to find something new or stretching a small prevention program even thinner. So I really like this one. I think this is a great example of the simplicity of a strategic plan and still mobilizing these tribes towards a collective, collaborative system.
Thank you. And this tab is still available online, I believe. I found it to be a nice, I think it's like 15 pages long. It's very, very high and tight, very good. So there are some many possibilities and ideas that could fuel your tribal action plan. I wanted to raise your awareness of a new grant that's come out from the Bureau of Justice Assistance through the Department of Justice. And the grant is called COSAP, which stands for Comprehensive Opioid Stimulant and Substance Abuse Program. They just extended, let me see, today is June 23rd. They just extended the grant proposal deadline to July 6th. And I went to the site, and it's interesting. I pulled out 10 examples of what other tribes and small communities have received funding for, and it fits absolutely within the Tribal Action Plan structure framework. But let's take a look at some of those ideas. One tribe received, I think, around $600,000 for a multiple year grant just to do this one goal. Here's another example. Establishing a comprehensive approach to tribal region-wide information collection, analysis, and dissemination of tools, events, programs, and treatment. That's an excellent goal. It's huge, but that's what one federal grant will support. That's fantastic. Cipriano?
Yeah, as you can see here, these goals are, again, excellent examples of creating a direction and not kind of micromanaging efforts. And it really kind of shows, ways that we can support, plan, develop, implement a civil diversion program through tribal court to assist members impacted by opioids. I know a lot of tribal nations are trying to understand what is that best practice, or how do we do that in a culturally appropriate way that is the language is amenable to our tribal citizens and what we're doing with our services. So as you can see here, these are just great examples of flexibility, yet providing direction and trying to support some collaboration efforts across tribal social services.
I like how each one starts with a great verb.
Yes.
This one is expanding court-based intervention programming. Like that. This one's establishing or expanding prevention programming to improve relationships between law enforcement and tribal youth and families. There's an idea. That's excellent. Another one, embedding, and I love this one, embed social services staff within law enforcement teams to respond to drug overdose and substance abuse. What a concept. Excellent. And this is a great idea that was popular a few years ago, and hopefully it'll come back. The Take Back Day or weekend campaign to collect controlled substances from homes, clinics, and other locations. Very helpful. All pieces that can add up to a fantastic tribal action plan. Support or expand medicated assisted treatment. Nice. Peer recovery support services. So those are just 10 examples, and there are plenty more on the COSAP, it's COSSAP website. I encourage you to take a look at that opportunity to find ways to fund parts and pieces of your tribal action plan, or to even inspire ideas for your own tab. I believe that they'll come back around again with another round of funding. It seems like a very popular grant. And so we'll round out this presentation with just a few other ideas to what's your imagination on what you can do with a tribal action plan. Here are some supportive objectives for that goal.
Yes. And a lot of these are just from our observations as a TA center. I think it's important for us to try not to reinvent the wheel. Our our center has really learned a lot from tribes, supported the development of templates. And as you could see here, these are just some great examples of what we're learning and what we're observing that tribes are using to mobilize their prevention and wellness efforts.
Thank you. And I want to draw your attention to the beginning of each bullet of these activities, and the goals and objectives always start, best practice is always start them with a verb. Gather, use, provide, prioritize, identify, because that's the action in your action plan. Conduct a community readiness assessment. Engage in the process, use the scores, refer to community readiness scores to ensure that goals match the readiness level, share the CRM results. Increase the CRM scores, create a cross-departmental task force, recruit, train, share, use, promote. It's very powerful. It keeps things simple, or rather streamlined. Here's a goal: mobilize diverse team of service providers, members, leaders, and others to complete the TAP. Yes, you can write that into your tribal action plan. It's completely permissible. Here are 2 objectives to support that goal: recruit members or leaders, shape the TAP to connect tribal youth and adults, culturally rich and skill-based prevention programming, and then activities to support that. And finally, another goal: update tribal policies and protocols to support prevention, intervention, and treatment. Supported by 3 objectives: update policies, promote the idea of cultural knowledge and sensitivity as an expectation, nudge collaboration. Now, the word nudge was made popular during the Obama administration as a way to nudge the powers that be to work together. You may not be able to have the power to make them work together, but you can certainly nudge them towards collaboration. So when you get through all of that brainstorming, then you start to you could use an example like different kinds of worksheets we've developed in the past, or you could make your own outline worksheet and start really dissecting the goal, finding out what the objectives you're going to need to have to make that goal happen, what outcomes you expect as a result. If that work comes to pass, what you expect to come as a result. That's your outcome. Who's going to lead the work? When will that work be expected to be accomplished, so that you can move on to other objectives and other goals? Here's another example. So you could take something like this, blow it up as a poster, slap it on the wall so everyone can see, and they can write themselves into that work. Again, we really do suggest that you keep this work simple. Don't make it something that's put away on the shelf or gets lost on someone's hard drive. You really want to keep it active and accessible so people can see themselves in it. They can see the activities as they're happening, and they can start to check off, even for themselves, things that they know that have been accomplished and what they would like to add for the future TAP revolutionary work that you're up to, that you're doing. And that gets us into reflecting and updating, which we'll start to talk about in module 3. Cipriana, did you have anything else you'd like to add before we start to close this presentation out?
I think I just want to say, you see the red arrows and it says, cultural way. And I think it's important for us as a TA center to acknowledge that tribes, your tribal nations, our tribal nations might have practices or processes that are more connected to them. And that should be primary in the planning process. So what does a cultural planning process look like? And what are the things needed to create that vision or that inventory readiness or brainstorming? Those will always be primary. The things that we recommend are strategies that we have learned or woven in or have developed recently. But those local knowledges and practices would be primary. That's where we see most ownership. And I think that when we create ownership over the process, that's when we get buy-in from those community members, those champions, the people, the workforce that are going to expand your department, your program's mission and vision. because we know that prevention programs are already stretched thin. And we know that some programs are doing the same amount of work as last year with maybe half the staff due to COVID challenges. So the idea of working smarter, not harder is probably more important now than ever. But working smarter might be that focused on the ways that we know and the skills we have in our community versus trying to bring in something new. So I really want to say that those red arrows, the primary piece is healing, the local knowledge is the way, and if needed, we have a couple best practices to contribute that. But those red arrows are really what's gonna create the ownership around these stages of the planning process. Thank you, Sarah.
Absolutely. So we have a little bit of time if you wanted to put your questions into the chat box. But while we're waiting, I just wanted to say that we've enjoyed spending this time with you. We hope you'll come and join us for Module 3 coming up next week at the next month on July 28th. But we know that the power to make changes within all of us, yet some choose not to act but react to outside forces. We believe that to act wisely is to direct your collective strength and energy to the vision of where you want to go. So as we wrap up this winter phase of our TAP planning, we want to leave you with the thought of preparing the ground for planting the seeds of change in the spring phase, which is up here at the top, acting and adjusting. And we'll meet with you again next month. We hope you'll be well and reach out to us anytime. A recording of this webinar will be available soon, and I think Mark will send that out to everyone. Do we have any questions or any thoughts?
I don't see any in the chat box. We could wait another minute or so if people like to write in a question or comment, or you could raise your hand with the hand raising functions. But I don't see any questions at this time, Sarah.
Okay, well, maybe we did a great job, but it would be great to hear some feedback. I think on the save the date, we left our emails for people to ask questions or send reactions or ask for help. But we're always available. We'd love to speak with you online or offline anytime you like.
Oh, we have a question. Hold on 1 minute, Sarah. The question, and thank you, Regina Roanhorse, for sharing the question. And the question is, how do we get technical assistance for one tribal community in the Navajo Nation, not the whole tribe, just To'Hajiilee? Excellent question. The very first part of creating technical assistance through SAMHSA, and this is just our program first, is if anybody Googled SAMHSA Tribal Training and Technical Assistance Center. And when you Google that page, the very first link that pops up is Tribal Training and Technical Assistance Center, SAMHSA. And if you clicked on that first link, you would open up our webpage. Our TA Center actually has made it extremely easy to initiate the TA requesting process. On that very first page, if you Google that page, you will see a brownish red box on the right side that says contact the Tribal TTA Center. If you clicked on that one, you would be asked 3 questions on the request form: your name, your email, and your request. And thank you, Mark, for putting the link in the box. Keep it simple on the request. You don't have to go in depth. Just write down maybe 1 or 2 sentences of what you would like to accomplish, what your hope is, or something that you would need assistance with. By hitting the submit button, you're submitting that request to our team and to SAMHSA, and that initiates our outreach process. We would reach out to whoever made the request and ask for a date and time that they and any invited guest on their side would be available for a call. That we'll try to do our very best to coordinate calendars to get the critical mass. We would host the call, and on that call, we would develop what we call a TA tracker, which would be the documents used to submit to SAMHSA once we gather all of the information about the hope, the vision, and the thought process with the TA, submit that to SAMHSA for approval. When it does get approved, now we have the resources to put that plan into action. So that is the number one way to request for the Tribal Training and Technical Assistance Center. But please note, we are just one cog in the wheel of SAMHSA around Training and Technical Assistance Center. Our focus is in the field of prevention. If your TA request is not in prevention, please feel free to submit it to us. We will have that discussion, learn more about your request, and help walk you through other opportunities if your request is outside the field of prevention or something that we can't do within our scope of work, because we're still tied to our scope of work as well. So yes.
Soprano, she's saying also, Regina's saying that they already are doing the community readiness assessment, which is a great first step. I'm wondering if they have the Native Connections grant out there in, where is that, in California?
So, you know, To'Hajiilee is an extension of the Navajo Nation. And, you know, like she says, they have a different health system out there and is not under Navajo area IHS. It's under Albuquerque IHS. So there's a lot of homework to do, Regina. And that's the kind of conversations we would have on that initial call, that intel of what, where, how you're working, how the services are being supported. Like Sarah said, maybe look at the prevention portfolio to see what goals and objectives you're currently working under, because that's kind of the low-hanging fruit around collaboration. So that initial call and those initial planning processes would actually give us a chance to understand all that out, because as you know, Regina, that could be a difficult system to wrap our heads around. And as a national TA center, your information is going to be vital for us to understand how to do that work. Do you have a CR? You're doing a CRA. The community readiness assessment is an unbelievable wealth of intel in the process. So having a score and coming to the initial call with those scores would really allow us to hit the ground running to organize some of the templates. And so, Regina, if you are already doing that score, there's two things. One, you have a model under your belt that is going to be a mobilizing effort, and two, you're going to have local data to strategize on prevention activities to help raise your readiness score. So I think that that's a big piece. And I hear your comment, the big Navajo involvement. You know, that's the luxury of our chapter houses and being community driven. You know, so I think that there's a lot of opportunity with that. But I do know the Navajo Nation does have their own tap that they're working on that kind of higher level, system level effort. So a lot of good intel, Regina. If you have any questions, we could definitely share our emails as well to just kind of see how we could best support. But initiating that TA tracker or that TA request would be a big piece. We hear you, and probably not the only tribe. So I was just tracking the comments in the box, Regina, and I'll share, Sarah, I don't know if you want to share your email just in the chat box in case she just wants to follow up with us on a little bit more about the TA requesting process and possible next steps.
Doing that now.
And then thank you, Terry, for the comments, and Simone for the comments on the webinar. There will be a recording out, and module 3, again, is really starting to put the action in the action plan. All right, I don't see any other questions, or Regina, if you had any other questions, please feel free. Thank you, Bobby.
Hi, Bobby. Well, thank you everyone for your attention. Hopefully we'll see you next month for module 3, and then we'll round out with module 4 on September 1st. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yes, thank you.